Yeah, I mean, password policy is something that cybersecurity or IT people have been banging on about for years, and no one will be surprised to hear that. It's become really interesting over the last couple of years because passwords themselves have become uh, insecure. So a
Mm.
password on its own is no longer considered acceptable. You now need to be utilizing platforms like two-factor authentication for everything. Now, two-factor
Yeah.
authentication makes a huge difference to security for small businesses. And again, is relatively free for all. It's included in almost every online platform that businesses have nowadays. It's just a case of turning it on. A lot of the time, it's not turned on because it's seen as a bit of a faff. It's annoying,
Mm.
frustrating. Unfortunately, it's a lot of the time the people at the top of the businesses who are the ones who don't want to be frustrated by these platforms, these things, and unfortunately, they're the ones who need the biggest protection.
Yeah.
So, cybersecurity needs to be led from the top down. So, even though it's a bit frustrating, it needs to be the top down saying, no, no, we really are securing our accounts, and we are putting
Mm.
two-factor on everything, and we're really sorry, this isn't an exception. There is no there's no flexibility in that. So it needs to be on for everybody across the business. We've been dealing with it for banking for 15 years now. 20 years. We've all been using
Yeah.
our PIN code platforms to get onto online banking, and so multi-factor authentication is effectively similar. That's the example I use a lot of the time is the banks where you
Mm.
have to put a second PIN in, and you have a phone, and normally what happens is you put your password in, and when you put your password in, it'll ask you for a code, and it'll send a code to your phone either by text message or by an app.
Mm.
There's some really good platforms out there now to try and standardize it as well. So rather than
Okay.
having lots of two factors, you have one protection platform that protects all your applications within your business to make it easy for your users. Again, going back to that, the simplest way of doing things is the best way of doing things for the users. So Office 365 can be made a central platform, which can then protect Salesforce. It can protect your accounting software. It can be, so it's one login in the morning. They use one two-factor authentication thing, and that way they can have a complex password on it, which is really, really important. And
Mm.
they don't have to remember a million passwords, and they don't write them down as well, because that's the other thing with passwords. Um, the use of a password manager nowadays as well for
Yeah.
users, so that they can have complex passwords for lots of different accounts and sites, and not have to try to remember them all, because we've all seen it, and it's that old school. Everyone kind of tries to have a capital, a lowercase, a number,
Yes.
a symbol, and it has to be more than 8 characters. And everyone ends up with their child's birthday or something like that. And then once they've got to the point where they've got a complex password that they remember, that's such a success that they use that for every account and every system
Yeah.
that they might have. Now, what that's a real problem for is what we call lateral movement. So what happens is if you get compromised or you fall for one of these attacks, and someone gets your credentials, well, that's bad because they've got into, say, Office 365, or they've got into your LinkedIn or whatever it was they got your details for. But if you've used the same username and password for all your online accounts, what they'll do is very quickly they'll move laterally across them. So they'll basically then log into lots of different platforms, and then you start losing control of a huge amount of stuff. That exacerbates the problem. It makes it much, much harder to deal with. And obviously, it risks your identity as a whole,
Mhm.
because at that point, you're losing your identity, you're losing all the
Yeah.
different areas. So it's really difficult. So we are advocating the use of phrases rather than passwords.
Okay.
So what we mean by that is use complex phrases, maybe 3 or 4 word phrases. They're much easier to remember. So they can be completely random. They can be the cow was yellow. Once the tree jumped. Anything you want to be a
Yeah.
phrase. They're quite long. You can put some capitals in there if you want to at the top of every word or the last point of every word. Put a number instead of an I if you want to in that phrase
Mhm.
as well. But it's much easier to remember a long phrase like that where you've got a way of remembering it, and it is actually as secure nowadays as having a long phrase is as secure, if not more secure nowadays, than having a short complex password.
Mm.
So if you do that, you can then end up maybe having different passwords for different accounts, remembering them. But ultimately, I'd say use a password manager, have different passwords for all your different platforms, and turn two-factor authentication on. It
Yes.
has to be on. It's not optional anymore. It needs to be on every platform, um, without exception.